The insult on the battlefield, the alien city burned under a sky filled with black smoke. Tall spires of crystal had been shattered into dust. The ground shook with the sound of distant explosions, and the air carried the smell of metal and fire. In the middle of the ruined main square stood the tiny alien Empress. She was no taller than a human child, dressed in silver and gold robes. Her crown shining even through the smoke. Her voice, though small, was sharp and cold. And it echoed across the broken plaza. "Humans are weak," she declared. Her bright eyes filled with pride. "They are slow, clumsy, and unworthy of the stars." Her guards, tall insect-like warriors with black armor, stood around her, nodding. In agreement, some alien citizens hiding nearby whispered and laughed. The Empress's words cut deep, as if she wanted every human within hearing distance to feel shame. Among the small crowd of survivors stood Daniel, a human soldier. His uniform was dusty and torn, his helmet scratched, his face hard with experience. He didn't shout back, didn't raise his weapon. He simply stood still, eyes locked on the Empress. His silence seemed to irritate her even more. "You humans," she continued, "are nothing but trouble for the galaxy. You fight like desperate animals with no honor." Daniel felt the heat in his chest, but he kept his calm. He had learned long ago that words could be ignored, but actions could not. Then the ground shook harder. A deafening blast ripped through the far side of the square. Flames rose high into the air as enemy artillery struck. Screams filled the plaza and panic spread like fire. The alien guards scattered, some running to protect themselves, others trying to shield the Empress. But a second blast came, closer this time. The crystal tower beside the square collapsed with a thunderous crash. Shards and rubble rained down. The Empress was thrown to the ground, her crown tumbling away. A massive steel beam from the broken tower crashed beside her, trapping her beneath. A pile of debris, her small frame struggled to move. Her voice, once sharp and powerful, now called out in panic. "Help! Somebody help me!" Daniel didn't hesitate. While others ran for safety, he pushed through the smoke toward her. Heat and dust choked the air, but he didn't stop. He reached the pile of rubble, his hands grabbing the steel beam. It was heavy, far too heavy for most, but he dug his boots into the ground and pushed with all his strength. With a groan of effort, he lifted it just enough to drag her free. The Empress gasped for air, her silver robe torn and covered in dust. For a moment, she just stared at him. Her eyes showed disbelief. The weak human had saved her. But her pride kept her silent. She tried to stand, but her leg twisted in pain. Daniel saw she couldn't walk. Before she could protest, he bent down and lifted her into his arms. "You can hate me later," he said quietly. "But right now, stay alive." She tried to push away, but his grip was steady. From above, the sound of enemy drones grew louder. Their red scanning lights cut through the smoke, searching for survivors. Daniel knew the enemy wasn't here to rescue anyone. They were here to finish the job. He turned toward the ruined streets. The city's outer wall had already been breached, and the sound of marching machines echoed closer. Every second mattered. The Empress looked over his shoulder at the destruction. Her eyes wide, she had never been this close to war's chaos. Never felt the heat of fire or the sting of smoke. Daniel ran through a broken archway. Weaving between collapsed buildings, his boots crunched over shattered glass in the distance. An alien gunship roared overhead, dropping more explosives. Each blast shook the ground and rained down dust. He kept moving, feeling her light but trembling weight in his arms. Her breathing was quick, almost frightened, though she tried to hide it behind them. The plaza where she had stood moments ago was now a smoking crater. The place where she had insulted humanity no longer existed. Daniel didn't look back. He had one mission now: get her out alive. But with the enemy closing in from all sides, even he wasn't sure how far they could get. And somewhere deep inside, the Empress began to wonder, had she been wrong about humans all along? Asterisk, the human strength. The ruined streets were a maze of smoke and fire. Daniel moved quickly, holding the tiny alien Empress close to his chest. Her body was light, but her presence felt heavy with pride and disbelief she had never imagined. A human's arms would be the reason she was still breathing behind them. The distant hum of enemy drones grew louder. Each red scanning beam cut through the smoke like a hunter's eye. Daniel knew if they were spotted, there would be no mercy. The Empress shifted in his arms, her small hands gripping his uniform. Though she tried to make it look like she wasn't holding on, "Put me down," she muttered, her voice still laced. With authority, "I can walk." Daniel glanced down at her injured leg. The joint was swollen, her robe stained with dirt and blood. "You'll slow us down," she said again, as if trying to prove she was still in control. "You're already slowing us down." Daniel replied, his voice calm but sharp. "So let me do my job." He spotted a collapsed bridge ahead. Blocking the road, steel beams and chunks of crystal were piled high, forming an unmovable wall. The Empress's guards, if any, had survived. Were nowhere to be seen. The enemy was closing in from the north. If they didn't get past this barrier, they'd be trapped. Daniel set her down carefully against a half-broken wall. "Stay here," he said, scanning the rubble, her eyes narrowed. "And what will you do?" "Move what you can't," he answered simply. He stepped forward and gripped the largest steel beam in the pile. It was twisted, its surface still warm from the explosion. The Empress expected him to fail. Even her strongest guards had struggled with such debris in the past. But Daniel's muscles tensed, his breath steady, and slowly, inch by inch, the beam began to rise. The ground beneath him trembled. Sweat ran down his temple. The beam scraped against the rubble, sending shards clattering to the ground. The Empress's eyes widened, not just at his strength, but at his refusal to give up in her world. Leaders ordered others to do such work in his world. A leader did it himself if no one else could. When the gap was just wide enough, Daniel returned to her side. "Hold on," he said, and without asking for permission, lifted her again. This time, she didn't protest. He carried her through the narrow opening, ducking under sharp edges of broken metal. On the other side, the air was clearer. But the danger was greater. A shadow passed over them. Daniel looked up and saw an enemy scout drone circling above. Its red lens scanned the street. "Locking onto movement, down," he whispered, crouching low and pressing her against the wall. Of a burnt-out building, the drone's beams swept past, missing them by inches. They stayed still until it moved away, its engines fading into the distance. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. Her voice wasn't proud anymore, just curious. "I insulted you," she said. "I insulted your kind in front of everyone." Daniel kept moving, his boots crunching over shattered glass. "You're not my enemy," he said. "Not today." The Empress didn't know how to respond. Her people believed humans were only motivated by revenge or pride. But this one was risking his life without asking for reward or forgiveness. She found herself studying him, the way his eyes never more stopped scanning for threats. The way he adjusted his grip so she wouldn't feel the sharp edges of his armor. The way he breathed like someone used to carrying more than his own weight. They reached an alleyway. Daniel stopped, peering around the corner. Two enemy soldiers stood at the far end, their weapons ready. There was no way back. They would have to get past them. He set her down gently, placing her behind a stack of broken crates. "Stay low," he said again, his tone firm. The Empress watched as Daniel picked up a broken pipe from the ground. It was barely a weapon, but he held it like he knew how to use it. Then, moving like a shadow, he crept toward the soldiers. The first never saw him coming. The pipe struck hard, and the alien crumpled. The second turned, firing wildly, but Daniel was already moving. A sharp swing, a strike to the chest. And the soldier fell. Daniel returned to her side, breathing hard but steady. The Empress looked at him differently now. This was not weakness. This was strength, raw and undeniable. And for the first time, she began to think that perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about humans all along. But the moment of thought was cut short from above. The unmistakable whine of enemy artillery began to build. Daniel's eyes darted to the sky, then to the ruined streets ahead. "Time to move," he said, lifting her once more, because whatever strength he had just shown, they were going to need even more to survive what was coming next. Hunted in the ruins stretched ahead like a maze of shadows. Tall walls of shattered stone and twisted metal loomed over narrow paths. The air was thick with smoke, making every step feel like walking through a dream. Daniel moved quickly, but carefully, carrying the tiny alien Empress close. Her injured leg rested against his arm, her small fingers gripping his uniform without thinking. Far behind them, the sound of enemy boots echoed. They weren't alone. The enemy hunting squads were closing in. Daniel could hear their sharp voices, their orders carried through the smoky air. They were tracking survivors, but he knew who their real target was, the Empress. She could hear it too. Her face, pale under the soot, turned toward him. "They won't stop until they find me," she said quietly. Daniel didn't answer. He already knew, and that was why his eyes never stopped scanning. Every corner, every shadow could hide danger. They ducked into a collapsed tunnel. The air inside was cooler, the light dim. Daniel set her down gently against the wall. "Rest for a moment," he whispered. She looked around at the broken stones and dripping pipes. "This is where humans hide?" she asked, her voice soft but still laced with pride. "This is where smart people survive," Daniel replied, checking the entrance. The sound of enemy drones buzzed above. A red light flashed briefly through a gap in the wall. Daniel pressed a finger to his lips, signaling her to stay silent. They waited, unmoving, as the shadow of the drone passed over them. When it was gone, Daniel crouched beside her. "We can't stay here long," he said. "They're sweeping the whole sector." She hesitated, then asked, "Why are you risking your life for me?" Daniel didn't look at her when he answered, "Because leaving you here means they win." "Is that a human thing?" she asked. "It's my thing," he said simply. Before she could reply, a metallic clatter echoed through the tunnel. Both of them turned toward the sound. The glow of alien eyes appeared in the dark. Enemy soldiers had found the entrance. Daniel grabbed her quickly and moved deeper into the tunnel. The enemy followed, their footsteps getting faster. They reached a side opening, a narrow hole in the rubble, just big enough for him to push her through. She resisted. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind," he said. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't a promise either. Daniel shoved her through the gap. On the other side, she landed on soft dirt and scrambled to look back. Through the hole, she saw him grab a broken piece of metal and swing it at the first soldier who entered. The fight was fast and brutal. One enemy fell, then another, but a third rushed him, slamming him against the tunnel wall. Her breath caught in her throat. The Empress had never seen a human fight like this. No fear, no hesitation. Daniel struck again, breaking free, and dashed toward the gap. She reached out her small hand, and he grabbed it, pulling himself through just as blaster fire lit up the tunnel behind them. They ran into the open street. It was quieter here, but Daniel knew the silence wouldn't last. The enemy would regroup and follow. They moved through the back alleys, stepping over shattered glass and crushed market stalls. Every shadow felt like a pair of watching eyes. After a few turns, Daniel stopped suddenly. His hand went to her shoulder, pressing her against the wall. From the other end of the alley, More enemy soldiers were approaching. He looked up. The roofs were close enough to climb. Without a word, he lifted her and set her on the roof edge. "Pull yourself up," he said. And she struggled, but managed. Then he climbed after her, moving like he'd done it 1,000 times from the rooftop. The city looked like a broken skeleton under the burning sky in the distance. War machines stomped through the streets. There, heavy feet crushing anything in their path, Daniel crouched low, moving quickly across the roof. The Empress followed, wincing with each step. Below them, the hunters passed without looking up. For a moment, they were safe, but Daniel knew it wouldn't last. The enemy had too many eyes, too many ears. He glanced at the Empress. She was breathing hard. Her pride still there, but quieter now. "You keep saving me," she said, even. After everything I said, Daniel didn't slow his pace. "I'm not here for your words," he said. "I'm here to keep you alive, and somewhere deep inside." The Empress began to wonder if this human strength wasn't just in his arms, but in his heart. But she didn't have long to think, because in the distance, the deep roar of an alien gunship grew louder. They had been spotted again, and the hunt was far from over. The close call. The roar of the alien gunship grew louder with every passing second. Its shadow swept over the broken rooftops, hunting for them. Daniel kept low, pulling the tiny alien Empress along, his eyes scanning for a place to hide. They couldn't outrun the ship in the open, and they couldn't fight it head-on. He spotted a half-collapsed warehouse below. The roof had caved in, but the lower levels were still standing. Without a word, he scooped the Empress into his arms and jumped down onto a lower ledge. They dropped into the building, landing in a cloud of dust. The smell of burnt wood and oil filled the air inside. The warehouse was silent, except for the faint hum of enemy drones outside. Daniel set her down behind a pile of broken crates. "Stay here and don't move," he whispered. The Empress frowned. "And where are you going?" "To make sure they don't find us," he said, already moving toward the door. Through the cracks in the wall, she watched him slip out into the shadows. Her pride told her not to care, but something inside tightened at the thought of him facing the enemy alone. She shifted slightly to see better, her injured leg throbbing with each movement. Outside, Daniel crouched behind a rusted metal beam. 2 enemy scouts were sweeping the area, their weapons drawn. He moved quietly, like a shadow, until one passed close enough. Then he struck. The first soldier went down with a sharp hit to the head. The second turned and fired, the shot grazing Daniel's shoulder. Pain shot through him, but he didn't stop. He lunged forward, knocking the weapon aside and delivering a hard blow that sent the soldier sprawling. The Empress gasped quietly from her hiding place. She had never seen such raw determination, not from her guards, not from her warriors, only from this human. She noticed the blood soaking into his uniform. It was more than a scratch. Yet he moved as if it didn't matter. Daniel returned. Quickly, crouching beside her, "You're bleeding," she said, almost accusingly. "It's not the first time," he replied, pulling her gently to her feet before she could say more. A deep rumble shook the floor. Daniel's head snapped toward the wall. He knew that sound. The gunship had locked onto their location. "Move," he said sharply. He grabbed her again and sprinted toward the far side of the warehouse. The air was thick with dust as the sound of charging energy built outside. They had only seconds before the strike. Daniel spotted a hole in the wall leading to a narrow alley. He shoved her through, following right after. The moment they hit the ground outside, a blinding flash lit up the warehouse behind them. The explosion roared like thunder, sending waves of heat and debris into the alley. Daniel shielded her with his body, taking the brunt of the impact. When the dust settled, the Empress looked up at him. His back was scraped, and his shoulder bled freely. "Why would you?" she began, but he cut her off. "Later," he said, breathing hard. We're not safe yet. The alley was blocked ahead by a collapsed wall. Daniel scanned quickly and saw a side door hanging loose. He kicked it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. Without hesitation, he guided her inside and pulled the door shut behind them. They descended into darkness. The air was damp and smelled of rust. Daniel pulled a small light from his vest, its weak glow, revealing an underground storage room. It wasn't much, but it was shelter at least for the moment. The Empress sat on an overturned crate, watching him as he checked the room for other exits. Finally, she spoke. "You fight like you've been hunted before." Daniel didn't look at her, "Because I have." Her voice was quieter now. "And yet you protect someone who insulted you." He met her eyes then, his gaze steady. "I don't protect people because they deserve it," he said. "I protect them because it's right." She didn't answer. Her pride still held her tongue, but her heart felt something unfamiliar. Respect. For the first time, she wondered if maybe the galaxy had judged humans too quickly. A faint noise interrupted her thoughts. Daniel froze, listening. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, were moving above them. The enemy wasn't gone. They were searching the buildings one by one. Daniel turned off the light and moved to the shadows. "Stay silent," he whispered. "If they find us, we run." The Empress nodded, her small hands curling into fists. Above, the footsteps grew louder, and the creak of the floorboards made her heart race. Then came the sound of a door opening, the one leading to their hiding place. Daniel's grip tightened on his makeshift weapon. The Empress held her breath. One wrong move, and they would both be trapped. The desperate escape. The wooden steps above creaked under the weight of enemy boots. Dust rained down from the ceiling, each grain falling like a warning. Daniel's eyes locked on the Empress, and he raised a finger to his lips. She nodded silently, her breathing slow and careful. The door at the top of the stairs groaned open. A harsh beam of light swept into the dark room. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, gripping his broken weapon tighter. The Empress sat perfectly still on the crate, looking smaller than ever in the shadows. The first enemy soldier stepped down slowly. Scanning the corners, another followed, their strange alien language sharp in the silence. Daniel waited until they were halfway down before he moved. In one swift motion, he grabbed the Empress, pulled her to her feet, and darted toward the far wall. His boot kicked aside a rusted panel, revealing a narrow tunnel entrance. "Go," he whispered, pushing her inside. The tunnel was cramped, the air stale. Daniel followed close behind, pulling the panel shut just as a beam of light flashed across where they had been. The soldiers shouted, their voices echoing. The sound of heavy boots pounded on the floor above them. They moved quickly through the darkness. The tunnel sloped downward, water dripping from the ceiling. The walls were cold, slick with moisture. Daniel's shoulder burned with pain, but he kept moving. The Empress's steps were uneven, but she pushed herself forward. Neither spoke, every breath reserved for movement. After what felt like minutes, they reached an opening. Faint daylight spilled in from above. Daniel climbed first, then reached down and pulled her up. They emerged into a half-collapsed courtyard. Broken statues lay scattered, and vines grew through cracked stone. Daniel paused, listening. The city's main sounds were distant now. They had made it far from the gunship's range. But the air was too still. He knew the enemy would search beyond the blast zone soon. They had to keep moving. He spotted a path leading into the outskirts. Beyond the ruined walls lay a stretch of alien forest, dark, dense, and dangerous. The Empress looked uneasy. That place. She began, "My people say no one comes back from there." Daniel gave a small shrug. "Then it's the perfect place to hide." They entered the forest. The ground was soft with layers of fallen leaves, and strange insect calls echoed between. The trees, the air, smelled damp and earthy. Every so often, glowing plants pulsed with dim blue light, casting shifting shadows on their faces. They walked in silence until a sound broke the stillness, a distant mechanical hum, growing louder. Daniel's head snapped toward the noise through the trees. He saw red scanning lights moving toward them. "They found us," he said quietly. Without another word, he took her hand and ran. The forest floor made it hard to move quickly, roots and fallen branches catching their feet. The Empress stumbled, but Daniel caught her before she fell. "Keep going," he urged, pulling her forward. They burst out of the trees and found themselves at the edge of a cliff. Far below, a wide alien river surged, its waters swirling in dangerous currents. The Empress's eyes widened. "No. That's the death current." Daniel scanned the cliff edge, hearing the hum of drones closing in. "We don't have a choice," he said. She shook her head, fear flashing in her eyes. "No one survives that water." "Trust me," Daniel said, his voice firm, "or we die here." For a moment, they locked eyes. Then, without giving her time to argue, he tightened his grip around her and jumped. The wind roared in their ears as they plunged downward. The cold hit them like a wall as they crashed into the river. The currents seized them instantly, dragging them under. Daniel kicked hard, pulling the Empress toward the surface. She coughed and gasped for air as waves splashed over them. The water was relentless, spinning them through rocks and broken branches. Daniel kept her head above the surface, his own lungs burning. He spotted a fallen tree wedged against the riverbank and steered them toward it with one last push. They reached the bank, collapsing on the muddy shore. The Empress lay on her back, breathing hard. Her silver crown was gone, her robes torn. Daniel's uniform was soaked and heavy, his shoulder wound throbbing, but they were alive. She turned her head toward him, her voice weak. "Why do you keep saving me?" He gave a faint smile. "Because if I don't, no one else will." In the distance, the hum of drones faded. For now, they had escaped. But Daniel knew the enemy wouldn't give up so easily, and the forest on this side of the river might hold dangers even worse than the ones chasing them. Trust in the fall. The forest on the far side of the river was different. It was darker, heavier, as if the trees themselves leaned closer to listen. The air was cool, but carried a strange, sweet smell. Daniel helped the tiny alien Empress to her feet, her robe clinging wet to her frame. She tried to hide the way her hands trembled. But he noticed. "You can rest for a minute," he said, scanning their surroundings. She shook her head. "The creatures here, they don't wait." Her voice was softer now, without the edge of command. Daniel nodded once, keeping her close as they moved deeper between the towering trunks. Each step was muffled by thick moss. Glowbugs floated lazily in the shadows, their pale light reflecting in the Empress's eyes. Strange vines curled like fingers along the ground, twitching slightly as they passed. She kept glancing around, her small form tense. Daniel could feel the shift in her. The pride was still there, but the fear was real. Behind them, the sound of the river was fading, but ahead, another sound began, a low rumble, deep and uneven. Daniel slowed, signaling her to stop. Through the dim glow, he saw movement. A massive creature, shaped like a mix of insect and wolf, was drinking from a pool of water. Its eyes glowed faint yellow, and its legs were tipped with curved claws. The Empress whispered, "River Hunter." Daniel glanced at her. "They're faster than they look," she added, "and they like warm blood." The creature raised its head, sniffing the air. Daniel knew the scent of wet clothing and blood would draw it straight to them. "Move slowly," he murmured, guiding her around. They stepped carefully, avoiding the dry twigs, but the Empress's injured leg betrayed her. A small stone rolled under her foot. The sound was slight, but enough. The river hunter's head snapped toward them, its claws digging into the ground. "Run," Daniel said, without hesitation. They darted between the trees, the Empress struggling to keep up. The creature's growl shook the ground as it bounded after them. Daniel's eyes scanned for anything they could use. Ahead, a fallen log formed a narrow bridge over a deep pit. He knew it was risky, but risk was better than teeth. "Across," he told her, pushing her onto the log. She moved slowly, her balance shaky. The creature burst from the trees, its claws scraping the dirt. Daniel stepped onto the log right after. The wood groaned under their weight. Halfway across, the log shifted dangerously. "Don't look down," he called. She didn't, but she looked back, and her eyes widened. The creature was climbing onto the log too. Daniel reached her, lifting her the last few steps to the far side. The log sagged under the beast's weight. At the edge, Daniel turned and shoved hard against the log. It rolled slightly, throwing the creature off balance. With a loud snarl, it fell into the pit below, landing with a crash. The Empress's chest rose and fell quickly. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You saved me again." Daniel gave a half smile. "I told you, that's my job." They kept moving until the forest thinned. Ahead, through the gaps in the trees, Daniel saw a faint blue glow. It wasn't the natural light of the forest. It was artificial. The Empress followed his gaze. "That's an outpost," she said slowly. "But it's not one of ours." They approached carefully. The glow came from a cluster of metallic shelters hidden under a canopy of vines. It looked abandoned. But Daniel's instincts told him to stay cautious. They crept closer, listening for movement. A faint hum came from one of the shelters. Inside, Daniel saw working lights and food supplies. "We can rest here," he said. The Empress hesitated. "If it's abandoned, why are the lights on?" Daniel didn't answer because he was thinking the same thing. He led her inside, finding a dry blanket and wrapping it around her shoulders. She sat on a bench, watching him as he searched for anything useful. Finally, she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "When you carried me off that battlefield, I thought you were only doing it to prove something." Daniel glanced at her. "And now?" he asked. She lowered her eyes. "Now I think you're doing it because you can't leave someone behind." Before he could respond, the sound of mechanical footsteps echoed outside. Daniel froze, his hand going to the nearest weapon he could. "Fine." The Empress's eyes widened. "They found us," she whispered. Safety and a new respect. The mechanical footsteps outside grew sharper. They were steady, deliberate, and closing in. Daniel motioned for the tiny alien Empress to stay silent. Her small hands gripped the blanket tightly, her eyes fixed on the door. Through the narrow gap in the wall, Daniel saw shadows moving. Tall enemy soldiers with long rifles scanned the area. Their armor glinted in the blue light of the outpost. He counted at least 4, maybe more in the trees beyond. The Empress's breath quickened. "They'll take me alive," she whispered. "They want me as a hostage." Daniel shook his head, his voice low. "Not while I'm here." He moved toward the side wall. Inspecting a narrow maintenance hatch, it led to the back of the outpost, hidden by heavy vines. "Can you crawl?" he asked. She nodded, though her injured leg trembled at the thought. Daniel opened the hatch quietly. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth. "Go first," he whispered. She hesitated, our pride still whispering against taking orders. But survival was louder now. She slid into the hatch, disappearing into the vines. Daniel followed. Pulling the hatch shut behind him, they crawled through the narrow space. The vines brushed against their faces, and the damp soil clung to their hands. Every sound outside, every footstep, every rustle made the Empress's heart race. Daniel stayed close, whispering directions when the path forked. When they emerged on the other side, the forest felt different. The outpost lights were behind them now, hidden by thick growth. But the footsteps were still coming. The soldiers had picked up their trail. Daniel grabbed her hand, and they began moving again. The forest sloped downward toward a valley in the distance. Faint lights glimmered, not enemy lights, but softer, warmer. That's human. Daniel said quietly, "A safe zone." The Empress blinked. "Humans have a base here." "Resistance base," he replied. "Not big, but strong enough." They pushed forward. The sound of pursuit never fading. The valley floor was marshy, slowing their pace. Mud clung to their boots, and water splashed with each hurried step. Daniel's shoulder throbbed with every movement, but he didn't stop at the edge of the valley. The lights grew clearer, small structures made of reinforced steel, guarded by camouflaged turrets. A human sentry spotted them and raised a hand in signal. Daniel waved back, but before they could reach the gate, a burst of energy fire sliced past them. The enemy had caught up. Daniel grabbed the Empress and dove behind a fallen log. The air buzzed with more incoming shots. The humans at the gate returned fire, shouting for them to run. "Go," Daniel urged. Pulling her up, they sprinted the last stretch. Enemy fire striking the dirt around them. A turret locked onto the attackers, forcing them back into the trees. The gate swung open just as Daniel and the Empress reached it. Strong hands pulled them inside, and the gate slammed shut behind them. For a moment, the Empress just stood there. Her silver crown was gone, her robes torn, her hair tangled. Daniel was covered in mud, blood, and exhaustion. But they were safe. The human commander stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the sight of the small alien. "Is that?" he began. Daniel nodded. The Empress herself, the commander's brow furrowed. "Why save her?" Daniel glanced at her before answering. "Because the war isn't just about killing enemies. It's about saving lives." The Empress met his gaze. Her voice was quiet but clear. "And because of him, I'm alive." There was no insult in her tone now. No mockery, only truth. She turned back to Daniel. "When I called your people weak, I thought I knew the truth," she said. "But now I've seen you carry me through fire, fight with your bare hands, and face death more than once. You are not weak." She finished, her eyes shining in the dim light. "You are stronger than I imagined." Daniel gave a faint smile. "We're just getting started." The commander gestured for medics to take them inside. The Empress allowed herself to be guided, but her gaze stayed on Daniel, somewhere deep inside. She knew her opinion of humanity had changed forever. And in that small human base, surrounded by strangers who had once been enemies, the seeds of an unlikely alliance were planted, one that might change the future of the galaxy. All because one human chose to carry an Empress to safety instead of leaving her behind.